Hello, good to be with you again today. We are continuing in 2 Samuel 3. We are in a bit of a messy chapter, but there are several of those in this book. Life is messy, and it's not hidden from us. We're seeing the good, and we're seeing the bad, and we're seeing some of the ugly. Now, just to jump right in, I've entitled today's message, Relationship Problems. And these can occur in a variety of levels. If we go back to the very beginning, how does this chapter begin? It says there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. They were divided. There was a relationship problem with individuals, and it manifested itself where the entire country was split in half. And there was brother fighting against brother. Another very ugly relationship problem we looked at last week, which was David. And we see here, I don't even believe a complete list, but we see his sons listed, which are undoubtedly a blessing. But then we also dug into a problem that David struggled with his entire life. And we think of the more famous issue later on with Bathsheba, but this is way before that. And while he has these sons, every single one of them is with a different woman. And it did not matter that it was a long time ago. It was wrong. It was not what God intended at all. And it was going to show itself with a lot of individual family problems. But they lead to bigger problems and to country problems, etc. And so, not overly dwelling on what we've already done in prior weeks, but what we see in David's life is he has some much deeper sin problems coming later, but they're showing themselves and manifesting themselves now. He might try to say, well, I'm busy being king. I got a lot of stress in my life. We find ways to rationalize things, but that's no excuse. And David is like we find ourselves. It may be the same issue as David, it may be a different one, but we have sins that cling to us, that entangle us, that beset us. Sometimes they manifest themselves earlier. Sometimes it seems like we're so-called getting away with it, but we're really never getting away with it, so we should deal with it. And we have, no matter how impossible it seems, we have a promise, God, to be able to deal with it. So there's no excuse. Well, with that background in mind, we're going to continue looking at another very large section of 2 Samuel 3. And it's another internal war. This time it's specifically on the side of Israel. Again, remember, the kingdom right now has been split. David is still, even though the promise was there, he's only the king of Judah, the southern part. And that Israel really is being led by Abner. At least he's the power behind the throne for Ishbosheth. And what we're going to see here is another personal relationship problem that has larger ramifications. So going on, it says, while there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David. Remember, this is a 7-year war. Abner was making himself strong. Remember, he goes back to Saul. He was a general. He survived, though Saul and his sons were killed. And he really has had problems with David for a while. Another relationship problem, by the way. Well, we have some more ugly details. Just got to tell you, things are not hidden from us here. And it said Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah. And Ishbosheth said to Abner, why have you gone into my father's concubine? And Abner was very angry with the words of Ishbosheth and said, am I a dog's head of Judah? Well, the language and things are a little bit archaic. but it's really just a big, ugly soap opera here. And I think there are several things going on. I think there was a lot of tension and probably jealousy. Maybe Ishbosheth, being a son of Saul, had a tendency like his father to be jealous. Saul was jealous of David. Maybe there was jealousy over Abner. We don't have all the details. We don't know if the charge itself was true, but this was a very, very serious charge. It was very insulting. And this idea, I had to look up these things about the dog's head, but this would be a terrible insult. The idea of dogs in the culture, they were seen as very low. We often, I like dogs, having a dog, I love dogs. They did not love dogs. Dogs would have been seen as something really dirty and vile. So he's saying, calling me a dog, giving him a very, very terrible accusation. And whether it's true or not, this creates a really terrible relationship problem, and it's going to affect the nation as well. So Abner is very, very hurt. He's insulted. His pride's hurt. And he defends himself. So again, whether we know it's true or not, what he says is this. And there's at least some evidence this is true, for sure. To this day, I keep showing steadfast love to the house of Saul, your father, and to his brothers, and to his friends. And I have not given you into the hand of David. And yet you charge me today with a fault concerning a woman. Again, it's like a soap opera. Now, we don't know about this incident, but we do know Abner had been in battles. Everything we see in that, he's misguided, he's on the wrong side, but he has been truly loyal to Saul. He should have already joined David. And there's nothing good. Again, the whole situation is distasteful. By any standard, it's not good. Yet, here's the interesting thing. Our lives can be quite a mess. Our relationships can be a mess. They can be ugly, and we can certainly suffer for it. Yet, there is something powerful. David's involved in sin. I believe Ishbosheth, Abner. Yet God can take something ugly. Really, all of our lives have a lot of ugliness in it, and He can accomplish something good. And so while this is all very problematic, it is amazing how God works out a plan for good in the midst of all this ugliness. So going on, it says in verse 9, God do so to Abner and more also, if I do not accomplish for David what the Lord has sworn to him. Now, I didn't really see that coming. I could have seen him slaying Ishbosheth. I could have seen him, I could see all kinds of scenarios. But Abner, who's been fighting against David for years and years, now says he's turning. Because of this hurt relationship, he's turning from the house of Saul. He's turning to the house of David. He said to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and set up the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan to Beersheba. And Ishbosheth did not answer Abner another word because he feared him. And by the way, it kind of reminds me of Saul. Saul wasn't exactly the bravest either. I think he's inherited a lot of things not so good from his father. And while he made the charge, he's still fearful that Abner's really the power behind the throne. So Abner had been against David for a long time. But now, he has a change of heart. These ugly circumstances, in his heart, he changes. And this idea of from Dan to Beersheba is really interesting. So, if you look at a map of Israel, at the northern part is Dan, and at the most southern part is Beersheba. So it's saying, the entirety of it. Just like we might point, to a city way up to the north of Minnesota, down to the tip of Florida or Texas or some southern point, to represent the whole of the United States. He's saying David, after all the prophecies, is going to now come into the kingdom. And I think of the passage from Romans 8:28, and we know for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. And David did have relationship problems. David did have sin in his life, but he did love God as well. And yeah, he's going to, on one hand, have some suffering in his family, yet God is still going to keep his promise to give him the kingdom. So, what happens next? So Abner sent messengers to David on his behalf, saying, "To whom does the land belong? Make your covenant with me, and behold, my hand shall be with you to bring over all of Israel to you." David said, "Good, I'll make a covenant with you." Now this is interesting. Somebody we haven't heard from in a long time. But one thing I require of you, that is, you shall not see my face unless you first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when you come to see my face. Do you remember that? Back in 1 Samuel, David's first wife. But now he had left her. He had been in wars and gone off. Obviously, he had had many other women. In fact, if we go back and look at that list from the beginning of the chapter, she's not even listed. He doesn't have any children with her. But he wants her back. But she's already married somebody else. Again, more of a soap opera. Then David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, "Give me my wife Michal, for whom I paid the bridal price of 100 foreskins of the Philistines." And Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband Paltiel, the son of Laish. Now this is sad. More relationship problems, more hurt. There's these two threads happening. God's purpose with these human tragedies. But her husband went with her weeping after her all the way to Bahurim. But Abner said to him, "Go and return," and he returned. So, and there's no indication that Michal necessarily wants to come back, and we'll see something later on in a few chapters down the line where she shows some contempt for David. But for whatever reason, to make the deal, he wanted to have her back, but we had all these other women as well. All right, back to the positive thread. Again, two interweaving threads of good and bad. A good scene, a bad scene. So Abner conferred with elders of Israel, saying, "For some time past you have been seeking David as king over you. Now then bring it about, for the Lord has promised David, saying, by the hand of my servant David, I will save my people Israel." Look how clearly he's seeing now. And he said, "They'll save from the hand of the Philistines and from the hand of all their enemies." And Abner also spoke to Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin. And then Abner went to tell David at Hebron all that Israel and the whole house of Benjamin thought good to do. When Abner came with 20 men to David at Hebron, David made a feast for Abner and the men who were with him. And Abner said to David, "I will arise and go and will gather all of Israel to my lord the king, that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may reign over all that your hearts desire." And David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. I will just say this at this time. Yes, David is coming into the full kingdom, and that is a good thing. And it seems good for Abner as well, and it's certainly good that with all the ugly circumstances, he's now getting with the plan. But this peace for Abner is going to be very short-lived. And his problems are not over. But we do have a temporary peace, and we do have David coming into his kingdom. So, how do we disentangle all this? Well, as I've already mentioned, I think two things are happening. Sometimes this is the way it is in our life as well, because we are made up of a a natural man and a spiritual man. And again, they can often be at war. And our natural man lets us down, but hopefully our spiritual man prevails. And Paul talks about this in multiple places, but certainly in Romans. So on one hand, these two things are happening. There's this sin, there's the human drama, there's the relationship problems. David, no other way to put it, he's got some messy personal relationships from the past and the present, and there will be in the future going forward. Abner and his relationships with Ishbosheth and in other ways messed up, and we don't even know, maybe that charge was even true with him, maybe it wasn't, but there's plenty of sin to go around. The other thing is, and it's true in our life as well, if we got messy, messed up relationships, it impacts other people. And it is like a soap opera. And that's not good. We should not want our lives to be that way. We can get entangled with sin. We can get entangled with dramas, but these are not things to seek. I know we make an entertainment out of them, they're TV shows, etc. But they are not entertaining, and they are not good. And even if God is ultimately working out things for good, these are still not to be justified as an excuse. And we can cause harm on people. But, not to end on a sour note, isn't it wonderful that despite David's sin and Abner and all these problems, God's plans that he ordained are still going forward? Decades before, there was a promise made to David. It goes back to who the book is named after, the prophet Samuel, and that David would be king over all of Israel. It was promised in full from Dan to Beersheba. And guess what? Despite the ugliness, despite all the sin, despite all the drama, God still keeps his promises. And that's a wonderful thing. And that should give us, in the midst of our dramas, which should be avoided, they also should encourage us. The gates of hell will not prevail against God's plans. God's plans are true, and they are good. And he has a plan for our lives. We should get with the program, but we can also be encouraged and have hope. So, as long as we live in this world, we'll have two things happening. Our natural man will have a myriad of problems, but let us in our spiritual person hang on to God's promises for good, and we will soon be seeing David fully come into his kingdom.